Greetings, dear mourners, and welcome to the Code of the Deadstream. We've got two delightfully dark segments for your enjoyment this morning. First of all, we're going to have our first ever faction face-off in a segment we're hoping will be a recurring segment called the Underworld games. We have Team Bone and Team Flesh here in the studio, and they're going to face off in a Court of the Dead version of the game Celebrity. I'll explain that after the break. And I apologize in advance for the Team Flesh faction. I've been told that they have dressed up special for this event. After our Underworld game, we're going to play for you an awesome in-depth interview that Susan did with Tom Gilliland, creator of Court of the Dead, and Jacob Murray, author of Shadows of the Underworld, our original graphic novel, which is now shipping. So you can pick up that if you go to side.show/ what's that URL? Shadows Underworld. And we're going to end that segment with a special contest launch, so you're going to want to stick around. Now we're going to take a short break and take a look at the Queen. We wanted to play the Flesh Faction leader for Flesh Faction team, kind of pump them up a little bit, because they're facing off with Bone, and I think they're going to need the help. Welcome back! It's time for the first installation of the Underworld games! So Team Flesh and Team Bone, get ready to root for your teams. If you don't know what your faction is, now is the time to find out. Go to side.show/courtfaction and find out your faction. If you do know your faction, I suggest you join one of our Facebook groups where you can collude and root on with your fellow factioneers. I have to say, of course, Bone Faction is the best faction. So I will be rooting for Team Bone Faction today. Let's get started. We're going to play... so we have Team Flesh up first.
Flesh!
Flesh! This is Tim, Jeremy, and Eric. All I can say is I'm sorry.
Flesh!
Guys, we're going to be playing Court of the Dead version of Celebrity. So that's a game played in 3 60-second rounds. The first round, you're going to take turns being presenters. The first round is like taboo. So you're going to be picking a Court of the Dead name out of our spooky little pumpkin here. Tim, are you first? You'll be describing that. Eric is first, so come on over, detach yourself from this human fleshipede here. and come stand with me over here. You're going to be pulling out as many as you can to get your teammates to guess the correct name without saying the name of the character. So you'll describe the character. If they say the name, you get a point. If they don't, you put it back in. And if you're not quite getting it, if they're a little slow, because they're Flesh Faction, you can throw it back in the pumpkin. So let's get started. I'll get the timer going here. All right, warmed up here, Flesh Faction. On your mark, get set, go.
All right, court jester.
No, that's just.
She's got a mask.
Cleosis.
Cool. Yep.
Flesh.
Master of the Underworld.
Deadstream.
Mm-hmm. Floating armor, purple.
Pass. Orgast.
Nope, pass. Blue skin, underwater.
Yellow barb. Green skin.
Gosh.
Pass. Go over this. Driving. He's a driver. The driver.
No,
Boatswain.
Paladin of the Dead. Bobby.
Relic.
Bobby. Relic. There he is.
Bird-esque.
Poxel.
Yeah. Queen.
Time.
I got somebody.
Does that count?
No.
Yeah, count.
Someone's clearly more interested in bone winning.
All right, let's count the official tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points for Team Flesh.
Join us.
Let's switch up the teams here. Bone, you are up next. Let's see. All right, Bone Faction ladies, the best faction. We have Kat and Rachel and Victoria here with us today. All right, ladies, you ready?
Yes.
All right, on your mark, get set, go.
Okay. Purple.
Kill.
The Queen.
Gethsemane.
Oh, Egyptian.
Cleopas.
Court Jester.
Malmistress.
The bird guy.
Poxel.
Bobby.
Relic Ravage. There we go.
Mermaid.
Handheld barb.
Alright. The bone lady.
Zyle.
Our queen. Human.
Shark.
The goat grandma.
Sheep.
Go, Grandma.
Floaty head.
Alienasis.
The two knives.
X-Rail.
The executioner.
Oglaville.
Our favorite, the lady bits.
Aragast.
Stop. The lady bits? Oh, yeah.
She looks like lady bits.
Orgast, the most feminist of the Court of the Dead characters. All right, and the grand tally for Bone after round 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13! Lucky number 13. Plus, you've got some work to do here. All right, let's switch teams. Switching teams. Round 2. Oh, God. Should actually be something that Flesh should excel at. It's charades. So we've put all the same names back in the hat. Who's our lucky charades performer? Jeremy. Good luck, Jeremy. You've got your work cut out for you. He will be doing the same names, but charades. The sound effects are.
Flash.
What is somebody feeding
I'm so sorry, folks. Okay. All right. On your mark, get set, go.
Queen. Gethsemane.
Malmistress. Yep. Relic Ravage.
Relic. Bobby. Voxel.
What?
That was pretty good.
Bird. Flash. Cleopas.
Gallivard.
Gallivard. Mermaid ladies.
What? Get this. What?
Mask. Sword.
Zyle.
Zyle. Breast. Breasticus. Gethsemane, not the.
Punishings.
Break. Snap. Breast snapper? Orgast.
Stop.
Sewing lady.
No, that was after time. I'm
Good
sorry.
time.
Shard?
All right, that wasn't too bad.
Come back.
Leave it to Bo to pick up the slack. Because the sound is so graphic. Why?
Flash. Flash.
All right, round 2. Splash faction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not bad. Not bad, guys.
We're even now.
Almost got off to their first round.
All right, at a 7. You beat your own score, so you've got that going for you. And for those of you that would like to play this at home, since it is a Friday and people might be enjoying some beverages and games this evening, we are using the cards from Court of the Dead Mourners Call. And you can actually download these online if you look up Court of the Dead Mourners Call on PDF and cut them up and make your own Court of the Dead celebrity cards. All right, Victoria. Charades for bones. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do this and go.
Oh,
no,
so much flesh on me.
Zyle.
Gross. Why?
Gethsemane. Yeah. Shard.
Nice.
Oh, Elianastus? No. Care. Oh, wait. No legs? I don't know. Mordical. Death, yeah.
Nice.
Oh, the Lady Bits are a guest. Oh, Sheaf. Oglev. Ezreal. Yeah. Elianastus. Galar.
Stop.
Nicely done!
Very good.
I knew you'd get that one.
All the teams
I mean, she's technically, you can also turn into a
2,
snake.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
There's a flush.
We've been flashed.
Looks like bonus piece to some double digits here. So
We can still
the
come
grand
back.
totals after 2 rounds is Flesh Team 13, Bone Team 23.
My strong side, go!
So those of you that took the faction quiz at side.show/court faction might want to take it again to be on a winning team. That's Team Bone. You've got your work cut out for you. I like your little flesh bib here.
Thank you.
That's,
Well,
maybe
it's
you
Friday,
guys should have
so.
spent some more time studying instead of making
No,
costumes.
worth it.
No.
Yeah, we're not cheaters. That's fine.
Trisaculus rules all.
So the third round in celebrity is just one word. So Tim will only have one word to get his team members to
That's all he
say
needs.
the
Yeah.
character name on the card. Are you ready, Tim?
For sure.
All right, and go.
Shard.
Mermaid.
Galvar.
Galvar.
Oracle.
Elianastus.
1,000 Lies.
Ezreal.
That's 2 words. Good. Executioner.
That's the disqualifier.
Brain powers.
Death. Galavar. Shard.
On the wheel.
Nice. Arbiter.
Sheaf. No.
Pass. I'll take her.
Death.
Captain.
Clattershanks.
Mordical.
You guys are terrible.
Trespasser.
Poxel.
Shard.
Queen.
Gethsemane.
Bone Dancer.
Zyle.
Damn right.
What?
Egyptian.
Cleopsis.
So messy.
Birdman.
Poxel.
Foxel.
That's 1 word.
Stop. Oh my god.
Good job, guys. I think we got all those that fell on the floor, too.
Yeah, I think you did too.
Just count those as points.
I was watching. I'm Bone Faction. I don't let these things slip by. Yeah, that was with the reject pile. Nice one, Tim. All right, so the final count. Just
right.
moving all the contestants come up. First of a round of applause for everyone for playing.
Rejoin.
Wait, we're not done?
Thank you for.
Didn't they not go?
We have one more round. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
I'm sure the scores are about even, so we could just call it.
Just so in the back.
Welcome back.
7, 8, 9. Well done. Cute.
well done.
Clap. Clap. Clap.
Oh my god. Okay. Oh, Rachel. All right.
We got this.
Okay, we got this. We can do this. We can do this.
All stress too much, but
I'm really. I prepared it. It's okay.
If we get 2 right, we win.
Exactly.
No, we don't want to just do it that
We
easy.
want to destroy
Yes.
all right, go.
Egyptian.
Yeah.
Us, yeah.
Queen.
Gethsemane.
Captain.
Morgul.
All taker.
Shit.
All taker.
Kyla Keller.
No, that's a different one. Yes.
Okay.
Osteomancy.
Oh, Zion.
Siren.
Galvar.
Oracle.
Nope.
Inquisitor.
Nope.
Nope. Human.
Shard.
Bird.
Puxel.
Knives.
Oh,
X-ray.
Ezreal.
Jester.
Malestros.
Paladin.
Oh, Relic.
Nice.
Go.
Go. Oh, Puxel. Sheev.
Executioner.
Time.
Aquaman.
Yes.
Holy
We did okay with that, Rachel.
That was a lot.
So it's probably close, right?
Yeah, very.
Okay, now can I get both teams up?
All right.
What we knew would be the inevitable conclusion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 again. So that's a grand total.
I prepared, it's
here
So did we.
Not enough.
A costume.
Yeah, yes.
You prepared a costume.
Very flesh way to do so.
Flesh Action with 23 points.
That's
and
game.
Bone with
Yay, we got it.
36.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Really close game.
We made Zyle
That
proud.
was close. Well
Although
done.
you get an effort point for
I think we get about 14 points for putting this damn
Whatever
thing
this-
together.
Yeah. I
Okay,
think
so
that-
37,
no.
36.
that
sounds
is.
good.
You should have put that effort forward towards studying.
Join us.
I'm gonna go over here
Boo.
where it's safe.
Safe.
Where it's safe. So this will be an ongoing segment. Next up, Flesh will be playing Spirit. So tune in yeah, next for a new game.
Absolutely will not happen.
And Spirit Faction, you'll get your chance to beat Flesh as well.
Spirit.
Next up, we have an awesome interview with Tom Gilliland and Jacob Murray about Shadows of the Underworld. And when we come back, we'll have a live Q&A with Tom, and we're going to launch a special contest. So see you shortly. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special segment of the Court of the Dead live stream featuring Court of the Dead Shadows of the Underworld. It is now shipping. How excited are both of you?
Super
Super
stoked.
That is
stoked.
super stoked. First time hearing that it's shipping. So
Awesome.
Sweet.
So this is an original graphic novel that is a standalone story, so you don't actually need to know anything about Court of the Dead in order to pick it up or have read any of our other books. You can just grab Shadows of the Underworld and read it, and it's awesome. It's 112 pages hardcover, and it goes for $29.99 USD. So here with us today to talk about Shadows of the Underworld are Court of the Dead creator Tom Gilliland, who you guys know, and Shadows of the Underworld writer Jacob Murray, who you guys may not know. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Sue.
This is your first time here, right?
It is.
It is. So you guys are going to talk a little bit about the process of creating the book. Are you ready?
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 No.
Okay. Let's
No?
do this.
Well, it's
Yeah.
happening. It's happening. So in this novel, there's a rebellion happening, and there's special elements that we don't necessarily know about or haven't been introduced to before. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, so the big framing for Court of the Dead, we know that the Underworld is sort of a emerging rebellious force led by the All-Taker, who's trying to reset the celestial domination of mortal souls and sort of set both his realm and the mortal realm free from this sort of shackle. But what we find is that while they have these noble ideals with which to pursue this, they are still shackled by a destructive nature. And this destructive nature creates kind of the catch-22 in their whole world, where the celestial oppression is on one end and their own dark nature, which sort of manifests itself in something that's come to be called the Dread's Grip, as kind of a malignant force that, as you express and use the Etheria, which is kind of the
The good
X Factor
stuff.
power,
Yeah.
the genesis of creation or whatnot, you can turn it to creation or destruction. And the more you use it for either, the more the Dread's grip is able to kind of nibble at the back of your mind and try and unseat your purposes and how you're going about doing that. So the Underworld is very susceptible to this. So the more they use power, certainly in a destructive way, even in protecting themselves, they can create this kind of problem. And the story really takes place around sort of setting the other side of the jeopardy that is what the court is up against, which is this Dread script, malady.
So what characters can we expect to see in this story? Some of the new ones that maybe everybody knows, and then who is being introduced and who?
Well, the two kind of stars that emerged out of the story were Kier and Exile, and I think there's been a fair bit of Kier. We got a couple of statues of her lying around.
Yeah.
And
she's
Exile's
like the Valkyrie, you know.
Yeah, she's
no
kind
big deal.
of
She's
just
kind of
general kick-ass.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
We all love Kier. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's hostile, and who doesn't love a hostile
Well, she's
woman?
covered in blood, so.
Yeah, and Exile.
A tattoo.
I was like, no, I know it's a tattoo, but I just wanted to see your face. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Teacher grading papers here.
And then the other big character who comes through the story is Exile, who I think there's been a little bit about him. He's in the Chronicle, and I think he's been a little bit more of a mysterious character, and he's someone who really comes to the forefront as a major player in the Underworld.
Wow. So who's the villain in this book?
The villain is named Gitas of Encore.
I'm sorry. Gitas Savankor?
Gitas of Encore.
Gitas Savankor. I want to say that like, okay. I'm not going to remember that. Gitas Savankor.
Gitas.
Wow. That has some...
I don't know what accent you'd say it with.
But it's still like, like I feel like that's like, you know...
Well, if you're going to be a villain, you're going to have some
That's
force
true.
behind it,
You need
right?
to have like the gravitas of being a villain, especially in the Underworld. So tell us about Gitas Savantas.
Alvancor.
Gitas Atlantis,
Yep.
Gettysburg.
Yep. Tell us about him and his motivation
That guy.
and goals.
Well, he's a new character to the Underworld to be introduced in this graphic novel. You know, one of the things that we wanted to do in this is, you know, there's such a big cast of characters in the Underworld, and that's one of the appeals of it, is that, you know, there's all these major players. But what interested me was who are the civilians of this place. And so Gitas arose as kind of a manifestation of the anxieties of the civilian population of the Underworld. Wow. So he's a, well, you'll learn about his backstory in the novel, but he's someone who's not too happy with how things are being run.
Oh, wow.
And decides to take things into his own hands.
Wow. So Tom and Jacob, like, how did this book get started? Like, what was the process to get the ball rolling on doing this?
Well, I think the aspect of what I was looking for was a way to, you know, get another big at bat at doing some comic content or whatnot. And we, you know, I really wanted to pursue less sequential stuff and more the sort of graphic novel, you know, between two covers kind of an approach. I like that. It's always been kind of what got me more excited. Maybe it's similar to, like, you know, binge watching on Netflix. You can kind of sit down, get it all, and let it sit.
Yeah, no one wants to wait week to week.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
But trying to find something then that would be consequential and could, you know, deliver another sort of, you know, leg to the, you know, the table that is supporting Court of the Dead, which was this necessity to get the, you know, the other aspect of their jeopardy on the table, which is this dread script portion. So we kind of talked with Jacob about, like, okay, here's, you know, Kier's the driving force and kind of doing this. She's the, you know, abandoned child of the Celestials and whatnot. So, and the dread script really originated in Heaven and Hell. It's what helped tear it apart. And now it's working its way into the Underworld as this new creation and on its way to tearing the mortal realm apart as well.
Yeah, it was kind of a fun, like, organic process in how this graphic novel came about. If I remember the very first discussions of it, it started as just a few, like, day in the life vignettes for some of the main characters, right? I mean, way back, what was it, like 3 years ago? So it's been a long process to get to it, because it really just started as, well, we want to feature some of our main characters and kind of get, you know, outside of the big grand scheme of Heaven and Hell and that play, and, like, well, you know, just who are these people? And, you know, the main driving question is, how do they respond to situations? And so we came up with this central event that we could see, view through the lens of all our different characters. And, that's how, our main villain came to be. And, and like I said, through that, Kiera and Exile jumped to the forefront as the two most compelling characters with the two most, I'd say divergently similar viewpoints.
Wow. And how did Jacob, I feel like we're backtracking a little bit. How did you come on board? Like, where did you find him?
Gosh, that feels like it's like a Comic-Con thread connection through...
I'm going to say
I was like going to say, it actually goes way back.
It goes way back, yeah.
I know that's a team.
Yeah.
So. Nothing in the Underworld is straightforward.
That's
this
true.
is as circuitous a story as any.
I mean, to be fair, you came to Court of the Dead through Gracie.
Yes, yeah, I was writing for the blog.
Way back.
Way back.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, and then I believe I...
Because you and I met like 5
years before.
Like
a couple
years before that.
Well, either way, enthusiasm it was the key.
Yeah.
I can always make use of enthusiasm, and Jacob had plenty of it.
Well, I saw that first big... I think I had been writing for the blog a little bit at the time already, and I don't remember what Comic-Con it was, but you put out that first big display of statues, and it was like, they had like, it was in the tent, yeah, exactly, and you just like walk through this little corridor.
2015, 2014?
15.
15?
Yeah.
Okay. And I remember walking through that and just being kind of blown away, but like, whoa, what is this? Like, this is not your standard stuff. This is not your, superheroes you're used to seeing every day of the week, and I so appreciated that, and I just love that there was, without even knowing anything about it, you could kind of get a sense of this world, and just from looking at the statues, I think, there was like 8-9 statues on display. It was really incredible. Oh, yeah. And my imagination just started rolling, and I said to Gracie that day, I said, like, what's the deal with this? And she said, this is a property that we're working on, Says, there more to this? Is this just statues? And she said, no, there's a world that we're developing. I said, whatever it is, I want a piece of the action here. I want to help develop this. I just fell in love right away.
Tom.
Ta-da.
Ta-da.
And I got introduced to Tom.
That's amazing.
Well, well,
Hit the
it's
ground
tough.
running.
When you're trying to collaborate on a project that sort of has this kind of sweep and as much sort of as much focus as I put on it, I know that the breadth of the piece will always feel bigger by collaborating with others, and Jacob's a great example of that. Someone who's sort of seized on the lore, seized on the themes of self, beating self-doubt and rising to your potential or whatnot, despite what your circumstances may be. And so being able to thread that into the interesting narrative and draw out the more unusual and the sort of whimsical and the really creepy portions of Court is kind of a trick. And so Jacob had a lot of aptitude and interest in it and was able to start threading the sweater along with me or whatnot. And so we did kind of carve this story out through something that was a little closer to the omnibus kind of content, where there were individual stories that kind of reflected on this point. And then I think we got to a point and it was like, I think we need to just tie this all into one long string, change the character composition a touch, and I think that's maybe when we introduced the Exile character a lot harder as a driving force, being that he's a fallen angel who's kind of come to be the All-Taker's principal strategist in orchestrating how they can unseat the celestial, entity, and lead him to some of the things that are going to be required to get this done. And so to have him sort of step in as the kind of CIA director or whatnot of the Underworld to deal with this situation that comes up from the general populace, the mourner base level, sort of citizens of the Underworld, was kind of the thing that they were least expecting. When you've got your big enemy and whatnot, you're very focused on that. And I think a lot of great, stories that have inspired me or whatnot are the ones where, the main elements are dealing with that, but they also have to kind of keep looking back behind them at what it is they're trying to say, what it is they are trying to protect, and realizing that sometimes you forget that and you forget their needs in the process. Like on the day-to-day, we kind of find the mourners, on their, want to know what the next morrow is going to bring them.
Yeah.
Are we getting closer to salvation or are we getting farther away? And while this malaise continues to kind of, control our world, our minds are drifting too. And I think that's where we find that, Gidi's mind becomes susceptible to the grip of the Dread script and he finds himself tripped and starts to pursue the darker aspects of what he thinks ought to be taking place.
Wow. Cool. I'm like, yeah, when is this coming again? It's like on my page. Jacob, what were some of the challenges in writing this story, and what did you consider the most difficult part of the story to hash out?
I'd say that the most difficult challenge in probably in anything in the Underworld is kind of, speaking to what Tom was just saying, is distilling the framework of it down to into a real relatable through line. You know, it can be easy in this kind of like large sweeping universe to get caught up in kind of like almost a more historical aspect of, you know, major events. You know, the general, you know, gathered his troops there, they fought this battle, this was the outcome, and then they moved on. And I've always been more interested in, you know, what are the kind of moment to moment, day to day machinations of people and characters, and what are their anxieties. And so trying to do that, which is the fun part, but while pushing through that lore, so that this, you know, we really did want this to be a place where, you know, we assume that, you know, we wouldn't want to think that this is a book that, oh, okay, if everyone's read the Chronicle and everyone's read the Omnibus and everyone's read all the things online and all the, you know, that then they'll get this. No, we wanted this to stand alone on its own and be a jumping off point as a complete story. And while it certainly is not the complete story of the Underworld, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We wanted it to be a good entry point. So I think being able to introduce the characters, onboard a lot of that information, you know, there's lingo in the Underworld, there's, you know, nothing is familiar. You know, it's not just like, okay, well, they're in a city, you know. Is it a city? Is it you know, a crypt? Is it a, you know, ethereal plane? Like, who knows? Like, so that's part of the fun, because it's just such a big sandbox, but it's also the major challenge in trying to relate that all down to a, you know, not human level, but, you know, something that's,
well, it's the
relatable
portion.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time that we really got a chance to do a long form narrative that really showed some of the court characters that we've sort of fixtured with small vignettes in a more, here's some real breathing room and some opportunities to do some character development and show what sort of a night in the afterlife really kind of looks like. What are the things that kind of drive their life? And their existence or whatnot, and, you know, what do they reflect on, since they have more time than we do, but other challenges that kind of, you know, create a somewhat parallel, like different but similar. I think that this gave us a nice opportunity to kind of let that happen, and you know, we've had a lot of folks along for the ride with us for years now that we really appreciate. Certainly I do, everybody does. And I think that this is part of the process of like paying this off. So this piece is like one of the biggest first full-form narratives. We're following this up with, you know, the novel of Demethile's origin that's coming up later next year, which is in itself another element of like how the rebellion in the Underworld really gets started. And these are opportunities to kind of really express this out. But, you know, this particular piece is both a chance to do that and write that story, but also couple it with, you know, visuals and, you know, and the comic art of Ivan Korotarov. Wait.
Yeah,
well,
I was like, that's actually the next question. What was it like to work with the book's illustrator, Ivan Korotarov?
So, you know, Ivan's been working with us for some time, and the joy in working with Ivan is he's a tremendous storyteller too, and he's got a great sense for how to set staging and, you know, deliver the goods, you know, when it comes time to kind of put it on the page. And so we would give like some director notes in the writing. Jacob would have some in there for how action points were going. I would have other things for, you know, hey, this is here, then this will be useful later, you know, all these types of things. But his sense, or his illustration has a great sense of detail, and he can bring the creep, and he can really kind of play it against the sort of whimsy of the Underworld as well. So a little bit of that kind of like, you know, not everything is just dour and torturous every day. I mean, there's all types of mirth and weird ways that they find to, you know, create a real existence. And he has a great way of bringing this out and bringing it out through the story. And I think some of his artwork really echoes with a lot of like really heavy line work, comic art that I don't see so much anymore or whatnot. Probably because most people aren't crazy enough to kind of sit there and draft all that stuff out.
His
But,
attention to detail is
he'll
unreal.
work skulls
Yeah.
and everything else into everything, which
Wow.
I'm always like, more skulls, more Underworld, more. So he's picked up on that, and he has just juiced up every page with like, you know, little details and elements. And I think that's, you know, in as much as we're trying to develop the characters, we're also trying to develop the world and demonstrate what does it look like, what's happening here. And, you know, the sense that, like, the Underworld really does have this sort of aqua-infused ethereal color that is the prettiest color in the sandbox. So, and there's parts where the story strays into some of the other realm ends, and it purposefully uses uglier tones to kind of demonstrate those particular situations. And you'll see that the color purple is a major deal in this. I think we've talked about this before, but the Dread Script's sort of signature in the story will always be purple. So as you start to see that, and if you look for that, you'll find it in some unusual places sometimes.
Oh, now I am gonna look
So.
for that. Awesome. So this is a question for both of you, Tom and Jacob. Do you have a favorite character or scene in this story?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you time to think that one through.
I like that
if you
Tom's
got
is
one
just
off
like,
the gun,
Tom's is
he
just like,
came
yep.
Well,
from
it's
the
like,
hip.
so the Exile character is a sort of secret super favorite of mine.
Okay.
And
So you
it,
can't
it,
go
it has,
too much into
it has
it.
like 30 years of ancient D&D DNA woven into it.
Wow.
So, but that aside, you know, it's in a world of anti-heroes or whatnot, to have one that comes from the celestial realm, which is like the heart of the sort of the sin of the story.
Yeah.
And to have this kind of, you know, redemptive themes are a big part of my anti-hero ethic. And he really echoes with this thirst to sort of not only save, you know, what his own world has done to everything else, but to sort of save himself in the process.
Wow.
And so as the sort of covert spy master of the Underworld, there's a scene where he steps in and there's a demonstration of his level of focus in the middle of a fight that is so on point that everything around him ceases to be of any importance. And we get to see sort of his angelic, you know, power kind of unleash itself. It's a snap little moment, but it's a tasty little piece. And it was definitely one of my favorites. I don't want to give it away, but
That's a fun page.
you know, you clearly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with the one that keeps coming to mind is the villain's origin story. It wasn't something that was originally in it, and we were kind of looking for a bridge point on how to navigate between two parts of the story, and that jumped out to both of us as, wait a minute, this is what's missing. You know, we've introduced this villain, we know who he is, and you know, you don't always need an origin story for a villain. I mean, a lot of times it's fun when, you know, there's a lot of mystery, but once we realized that, you know, this is what the book needed, that was just such a fun piece to write, and Ivan's art is so kick-ass, and as you said, like, there's a big tonal shift just even in the colors when it comes over. I mean, just when you're flipping through the book, like, it jumps out to you.
Oh, wow.
And you know, it's got creatures, it's got, you know, nastiness, it's just a lot of fun, and it's also one of the most human parts of the book too.
Wow.
Even though none of these people are
Yeah,
human.
yeah. Well, it's also.
Did I say
you know,
human?
Like, it's,
I didn't mean
because it's
human.
like, you know, the villain's origin in the Underworld could easily be, you know, through some dark, wicked crypt
totally.
of, you know, coated in slime or whatnot. It's like, okay, we do that all day long, but to have this come from the book, dare I say, the wholesome portion of the Underworld, made for an interesting kind of twist in this regard. So.
Wow.
I think that plays out really well, and it is a charming little element. Yeah, it almost stands as its own little vignette. You know, it's just, but
That's awesome. Now I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I can't wait to read more about this.
it's cute and violent at the same
It's
time.
cute and violent at the same time. I love it. It's my favorite
A little
combination.
bit of a showcase of like mourner culture. So,
Yeah, that kind of is cute
Right.
and violent at the same time. So, last question is, what new dimensions does Shadows of the Underworld bring to the Court of the Dead universe, and what will readers walk away knowing or seeing that is new to the world if they've you know, been a part of the court since the beginning, but if they haven't, like, what are we opening their minds and eyes to?
well, I think the aspect you'll see now is that, you know, for future storytelling, that the court itself and the court fixture anti-heroes are, while they're dealing with whatever the big war that they're trying to set up with heaven and hell is going to be, that they are going to constantly have to be looking inside and at themselves. So this jeopardy of the dread script, and that the book kind of makes a demonstration that the dread script is sort of evolving. So as they are gaining power and gaining in their ability to take on their celestial foe, their dark nature as their sort of hidden foe is adapting to their adaptation and finding new and better ways for it to try and exert its sort of it's just looking for that word, like flipping, it's looking to turn the underworld to its darker potential, rather than let it achieve its ideals. And that's what that's where the destruction sort of starts to have a personal presence in the story, and we'll find more and more that it has a much deeper rooting in the origin of how the underworld was created in the first place.
I want to go back to the question you asked about what was the biggest challenge in writing the story, and just amend it to that.
Let me figure that part out.
We'll come full circle then.
Well, we now have the rock and the hard place.
Yep.
The underworld is sort
There we
of
go.
set through, and I think when you also there's the Mourners Call board game that's coming out very shortly. But a big part of the game is this sort of celestial tithe on one side in the game mechanic that you have to pay, and then the dread grip portion on the other side. And this story kind of explains why in the game there are these two sort of leverage points on either end of the teeter-totter in the game that you have to kind of keep balanced, or you're going to lose the game as a collective whole.
Wow. Awesome. Wow, I feel like I'm absorbing so much information, but now I just really want to read Shadows in the Underworld.
Yeah, I almost don't want to answer those questions.
Yeah.
I think that's the point of the book.
I know. So instead,
what will you learn from the book?
Well, why don't you go read it? So just to reiterate, Court of the Dead, Shadows of the Underworld is going to be shipping now, and the book is a 112-page hardcover graphic novel, and it is a contained story. So thank you guys so much for joining us here on this segment. Thank you, Jacob, for surviving your first Court of the Dead live. I'm sure there'll be very many more. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you on, Tom. So guys, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with Tom Gilliland to do a live Q&A about the Shadows of the Underworld original graphic novel, which is currently in stock and shipping right now. So if you go to side.show/Shadows Underworld, you can pick up your copy right now. Please be sure to drop some questions into chat for Tom. And also, if you're in chat, note some of the links that Bree and Buffy are dropping. We're running a super cool contest. You can win a copy of the book. We're going to pick 3 winners, and Tom is going to sign and personalize those copies. And I have to say, as someone who has a signed and personalized copy, courtesy of Tom, his personalizations are pretty funny. So we're going to pick
pressure on now, right?
3 winners. Let us know your faction, maybe some personal details. You want a dedication that includes your cat, give us a little something to go on, and we'll do a cool personalization.
Bank account number?
So I'm here with Tom. Yeah, bank account number.
No?
We'll send you a few statues.
Something will happen.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us,
Oh, you
Tom.
bet.
We've already got a ton of questions in. Let's jump in with one from Warhawk Legend 69. Tom, what did you do for a living before you worked at Sideshow? And I would add to that, how did your work previous to Sideshow influence your storytelling and world building skills that you've kind of brought to bear here with Shadows of the Underworld?
Wow, you just ran over my joke answer, so I guess I'll move past Shark Wrestler.
Oh no, let's go back. What did you do for a living?
I worked in makeup effects, so I was a creature painter. I worked for Rick Baker of Cinovation.
I've heard of that guy.
His name might ring a bell. I started on Men in Black, was the first film I worked on.
Oh, awesome.
And actually, that sequence when they go in the kitchenette and there's the 4 kind of wormy alien characters, I painted all 4 of those. So
awesome.
It was a practical effect, and that was the most fun I had working on films was that film.
That's a good one.
And so I worked there for about 4 years. And I think the aspect of it was I had been working with other companies that did model kits similarly to what we have kind of evolved to statue collectibles to.
Back from
too.
the
back
Mad
then.
Model Party days.
Exactly, yeah.
Right on.
So I was working product, but I really wanted to paint for a living. So I did this in the films and whatnot. And I think part of that was also then sort of seeing how the behind the scenes of this went.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there were aspects of that kind of coupled with, just reading and, playing Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is probably the most
That's great world building
significant thing
experience.
for trying to figure out how to do all this. But it was neat to see the practicality of how these things worked, so you understood what did and didn't work on film. And I think that is a big thing that influences not just Court of the Dead stuff, but the Sideshow, pantheon of products that we do across the board.
All of which are
Yeah,
lined up behind
everything.
you there. This is an interesting question from JJ Joe. Is Jacob writing the books or are you writing too? Why don't you talk a little bit about kind of that back and forth process of the story building and then the actual writing of scripts and editing?
So there's kind of an architecture phase and then there's the writing phase. So in the architecture phase, we're talking about the flow of the story, the beats, the thematic elements that need to be there. And so my writing style isn't so prose beneficial, so I let the writers do that work. It's really more in the construction and the setup of themes and again, like different trigger elements in the piece. So I'll work in this case with Jacob and we talked through what needed to happen, which characters needed to have what level of influence or highlight in the piece and where that should come. And in this particular case, talking about, well, what are we going to say about the Dread script, where and how? And then also like interesting things like the little cameos that we might insert characters in the background of shots and stuff like that.
So speaking of that, actually, we've got kind of a fun question. Is there a character you would like to explore more, or is there a character we haven't met yet that we will meet in the future? I know you and Jacob talked about in your interview kind of, Kier and Exrael, and Exrael really kind of got his entree in this book and his debut, and we kind of got into him a little.
Yep.
So there are other characters you're eyeing up?
That was kind of a good
future?
example of that in this book, because Exrael was was going to just be at the beginning, but then I was like, no, this makes way more sense to have the two celestial characters that are in the court kind of deal with something that is in the origin of their original realm. There's some the other characters that are in Exrael's Conclave of Shadows, like Rafe, who is kind of the queen's bodyguard, but also sort of Exrael's sort of, I don't know if you could call it drinking buddy or whatnot.
Sword bros,
yeah,
right? Isn't that what
that's
we
what
call
you
it?
guys keep saying.
The sword
but,
bros.
And also there's a character named White Shiv that's kind of an outlier in the Conclave.
He's a dreamboat.
Is really the queen's darling and not exactly Exrael's favorite, but he gets the job done and is a little bit of a kind of vigilante on the streets of the Underworld, and I think that's a fun story. But
he's a favorite of
probably
Rachel.
Relic Ravlatch is probably the biggest thing. I don't know that he's so much as a cameo in a book as he's his own book, but I think the only thing that is in the way at this point is just time. I would love to just crank these out, and we're working, and it's working really nicely. So having Jacob on board is working great. Working with Beatrice Van Slee to book the Demathon, was once a novella, is now a total novel.
Straight up novel.
Is really awesome. There's a number of characters that kind of sneak their way into that too. So, so Ravlatch, White Shiv, some of these kind of shady hotshots in the background of the deal.
Speaking of hotshots, I noticed you wearing a Spirit Faction shirt today.
Well, you had the, bone and flesh goofballs in here.
Yeah,
so.
Obviously, I'm representing my faction. Flesh did their weird custom bedsheet thing. People are wondering,
3 for 1.
What's
That's
your faction,
adaptive.
Tom?
My
are you gonna
faction
claim? We've been
is
desperately
the
getting.
United Underworld Prerogative. I didn't fall for this.
Oh, slippery! We've been trying to get Tom to commit to a faction for years, and he'll never let that
They're
one
all
go.
equally important, just like my kids.
Let's see, what else have we got here? Tom, if Court of the Dead from Sinful Haley, awesome handle there. If Court of the Dead was ever made into a video game, which game developer would you love to work with to make it?
Wow.
Do you have a favorite? Or do you have a favorite type of game, maybe even?
I think I know the games by playing. I don't know the vernacular so well, but whatever. It's like Red Dead Redemption was without question my favorite game ever. So
and
that
why
kind of
is
open.
that?
I think it was nice because it was sort of a single story narrative that you could pursue, but you also had the open world aspects of what I always enjoyed from World of Warcraft, to go out and just boot around and kind of create your own little stories. And they had a lot of little vignette encounters you could get involved in that added to your own personal story, but didn't really change the major narrative. So I thought that was a nice balance and whatnot. And I thought that was something I would really love to see for Court, because it allows you'd be able to interact with the major Court characters, but you'd also, you'd get to explore the environment, which is something that often takes a sort of backseat in the publications, because you have to tell the character stories. But to go through the wallows and find, the different places out there, and old abandoned cathedral elements from the mortal realm, or old, like dungeon-esque things that have fallen in from the celestial realm, and all this, clutter and junk that tumbles in there. Has just a host of secrets. So the amount of like exploration and questing you could do would be just
really
bananas.
fun.
So, and then, again, a narrative that's kind of helping push along some of the Alltaker's general purposes was what we were kind of looking at. And,
getting back to the book, obviously this is an introduction to the concept of the Dreads Grip in story format. And the Dreads Grip has a very distinctive look artistically. I mean, you can see in the book the purples, the hot reds. We use some really cool neon inks through our publisher. Let's see if I can find a page to show that. But let's see. I want to make sure I attribute the question. Carlos Abrijo Jr. is asking if we'll ever see Dreads Grip versions of some of our premium format characters, which is kind of asking for some spoilers here, because you're going to see if someone turns to the dark side there.
Actually, that's not as far away as folks may think. The Poxel character is a bit touched by the Dreads Grip. So, and in fact,
he's a gnarly
the
little
studio
dude.
next door, where all the photography goes on, is where he's being shot right now, with a little bit of that
Here,
purple
I'm gonna hand
touch.
you this.
So.
Here's some cool Dreads Grip coloring. Those neon inks are really, I think, a unique feature of this book.
Right, there we go.
It's gorgeous and creepy.
Oh, hold on. Jeez, this is like a trick. Okay, there we go.
So pretty, so gross.
So I think, especially in like comics, one thing that's really super helpful in telling the story is how to use these visual elements. And color, obviously a big part of it, was a great way for us to show what's different about an enemy in a world that already is somewhat struggling with its anti-hero kind of point of view. So the Underworld is not exactly the Disneyland, but it has its own beatific color or whatnot. So the way to sort of show the counter to that was to try and find an alternative color that would show the conflict. And so that ethereal blue that really powers the court anti-heroes, it's definitely offset by the purple then that is kind of Gitas Avancor's kind of signature sort of touch. Anywhere you see him in the book, that you see right away, and any of the other rakers that are accompanying him are generally accompanied by a little purple, purple touches and whatnot.
And if you'd like to see more of that in action, keep your eyes peeled to our social media. I think we're going to release some behind-the-scenes photos from the Poxel premium format photo shoot that's going on right now with our wonderful photographer Cassie Fuertes.
Yeah,
she went and collected some singed branches from our poor burned hillsides, but has done some amazing work with special effects and lighting. It's going to be an amazing gallery for that figure. Awesome. So we'll share some of that with you guys. Tom, a question from Danella Hughes. What location in the Underworld would you frequent?
I would probably be hanging out in the taverns in the Curio Cryptis for most of the day.
Collecting memories.
Or making better deals for myself. That's no doubt the case.
Playing some poker.
And maybe getting in a few duels. I don't know. So generally a layabout in the Underworld, probably.
Another question here from Hank, and I apologize, Hank, I'm going to mispronounce your name. It's either Slat or Slate, maybe? Sorry. Anyway, Hank is asking, is Relics handheld skull actually a lantern, or is it a transport device for the souls, kind of like a Ghostbusters trap? I love this question, because I love Relics.
Well, it's called the True Burn Lantern, and it is actually a modified celestial artifact.
He's kind of an asshole.
So, and he is an asshole. Early in Relic's career as a relic knight in the Underworld, he finds the True Burn Lantern and activates it by realizing that it is powered by these small sort of crystalline fragments that seem ethereal bound.
And it's sentient, right?
And when he turns it on, he realizes that this has kind of an angel's conscience in it. and this angel is sort of motivated to sort of right the wrongs of the universe.
A morally
from its very
upright
minor
jerk.
thing. Oh yeah, very much so. Very self-righteous.
Very bone faction.
So a touch of the celestial arrogance or whatnot, but it partners with him, and what it does is it shows Relic Ravlatch, allows him to see things true. So as long as he's pursuing things truthfully and with the righteousness that the True Burn Lantern is demanding, then the True Burn Lantern delivers the good. So we were talking about video game kind of context, Relic Ravlatch being an awesome quest character, as he goes through things and whatnot, is using the lantern to peer at stuff. It lets him, if he's been playing ball or he's on the right course of action according to the lantern, then the lantern helps him significantly by, helping him to do, figure out clues and see things that he might not be able to see.
But my best part of the story is, what does Relic do if what is the lantern and Relic, what is their dynamic if Relic decides for some reason not to do what the lantern deems the correct and proper course of action?
I'm trying to think of where you're leading me, but in general, he basically makes him suffer significantly. So he'll make him run on the most obscure errand to fix the most. No, a little baby bird fell out of a nest. You need to take care of that.
But there's a fire over here, and he's like, no, baby
we're
bird.
Dealing with this. So yeah, there's quite a contest of wills that goes on there. And considering that Relic Ravlatch's will is kind of one of the stronger in the Underworld, it's quite a contest. So.
Let's see. Oh, this is a great one from JJ Joe. Tom, how did you come up with the names of all the characters?
There's like an eye chart on my wall, and I throw it. No, a lot of it, like, again, some of the names go back to old D&D games. And I think that in that early on, I always kind of came up with my own kind of naming function. So I don't know. I pulled names from, or themed names from, like I guess it's like some Nordic examples of the use of language and how words are put together.
So like the
others are like heavy
etymology
metal
like
spelling
core.
of stuff. So it's like, well, the character's name should be this, but what would that look like on an album cover? So that has to have a couple more L's, throw in an umlaut and something else. And I think part of it also, as it related to court, was to find names that sounded very non-mortal. So, Bob the Inquisitor's not really that exciting, but
Not doing it for
Aglavale
you.
the Executioner as as a special
It's a
ring.
little fancier.
So, yeah.
Of course, we help you with nicknames of these characters.
Yeah, you're
don't we?
real helpful with
'Cause we-
that. Real helpful.
Because Relic Ravlatch is really, Bobby to all of
Yeah.
us in the know.
Speaking of Bob. Anyway. Well, you gotta have fun with this while you're working this out. So that's part of like what goes on behind the scenes, There's this shorthand to try and get all this stuff done, and that's part of it. So
We've got a couple questions about Mourner's Call. I do want to keep the focus on world building and on the graphic novel, but this kind of plays into it, so I think it's a good one. Is there a faction that you like to play in the board game? And I think that you can talk a little bit about kind of in relation to the factions with the Underworld games and kind of the friendly competition and how that kind of plays out here in Shadows and in Mourner's Call. Generally, what are you trying to achieve? What does each faction bring to the game, to the book?
Well, in Mourner's Call, I like to play the Flesh faction the most. I think the cards have like a lot of the sort of skeevy plays that I prefer. And there's a lot of sort of change up abilities that they have.
I feel
and
like
it's
this all
also,
boils down to Conclave of Shadows because you get to kill someone if you win the Conclave Guild. So
well, they put him back in a crypt. But so I think the adaption is an element that is a great way when you're sort of being pursued by the dread script, which is eating at your dark nature, to kind of consistently be able to adapt your own psyche, persona, and your sort of creeds or whatnot helps you consistently redefine yourself. And by doing so, I think that that's a sort of inherent protection from your own self-doubts and your destroyer nature that's trying to flip you. I think Bone, I think that sort of speaks for itself. I mean, the sort of rigidity of the discipline is set to create a bulwark in your mind to kind of close off yourself so that you can't be influenced in that way. But the downside of that is you can't be influenced positively for change as well. So that's where the Flesh and Bone factions often are butting heads in terms of elements of preserving set, mechanisms that work for the Underworld and trying new stuff that might be dangerous or otherwise. So Xylo and Gethsemane constantly debating the merits of that, while Aeolian Astis tries to use the aspect of spirit as a sort of a dodge. So if you give into the greater creation of things, you're basically giving into the antithesis of the dread script, which is its destroyer base. So you're and that's kind of the flip in Court of the Dead between good and evil. Good and evil are somewhat situational and circumstantial to your actions, whereas creation and destruction are kind of the root of your intention or whatnot.
So it's a healthy tension that kind of helps us achieve balance.
Well, they play off themselves. Like if you got it in a weird Venn diagram of sorts, you have good, evil, destruction, and creation, because they can all be used across the spectrum. So I think it's, ultimately what your intention was and what the result is then that combine to create whether you're on the good or bad side of it.
Spectrums, not dichotomies.
Right.
Well, thank you
Oh, you
for
bet.
joining us, for answering some of this live Q&A with everyone. Again, Shadows of the Underworld is now shipping. You can pick up your copy at side.show/Shadows Underworld. Also, don't miss the links in chat to our Gleam contest. You could win a personalized copy of Shadows of the Underworld. And I have to say, Tom
Yeah, better come up with something
personalizes
good
like
here,
none
man.
other. Send us your faction and some personal
Need some
information,
details, though.
and Tom will spin you a little story inside the cover of your book, which is pretty cool. So thank you for joining us. It was a pretty fun live stream
Yeah,
this
right
time
on,
around.
yeah,
We had
good
our
times.
first episode of the Underworld games with Bone versus Flesh. Next up, Flesh versus Spirit. And we'll be posting that interview with Tom and Jacob online if you want to delve back
Awesome.
in there and hear them talking more. So thank you for joining
Cool.
us. Take care, everybody. Rise, conquer, rule.
Right on.